Hello guys, I've continued reading through another chapter in the Christ of the Covenants, and there was a short section on the Covenant of Redemption, just a couple pages long, and then it went on to the Covenant of Commencement, the Adamic Covenant, and I got quite a bit of notes on that. So, starting to get into these each individual covenants, and the next one after Adam will be Noah. And so let's talk about the Covenant of Redemption. Is distinct from the covenant of creation. The covenant of creation was before Adam fell, and the covenant of redemption is after the fall. And the main thing about it is that God is gracious, and as the curse of the covenant of creation is spoken, so is the covenant of redemption inaugurated. And so this comes right after the curse of the covenant of creation. The covenant of redemption is to bring the original blessings of the covenant of creation to realization. And it's not just to get back to, the state of the garden, but also but even beyond that, and it's to bring everlasting life as was originally intended. Man is still responsible for the original commands. That's how I wrote it. But basically, what I talked about previously in the covenant of creation, how there's the different ordinances, like man is to keep the Sabbath, just as the Lord rested on the seventh day after 6 days of creation, and so that's the example that man is to follow. And then I talked about marriage, how a man is supposed to stay with his wife and things like that. And labor, a man is to labor. And so those things are still continuing. It's only the, not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That test is gone. But the other things still exist. And so there is the connection between the covenant of creation and redemption. As that man is still responsible for those things that were originally in the covenant of creation. As history progresses, the fuller implications of the covenant of redemption become manifest until the consummation and the appearance of Jesus Christ. We read in Galatians 4:4, it speaks of the fullness of time. And so that is the appearance of Jesus Christ. That's when the consummation of these things. So just a little bit there on the covenant of redemption. And so all these covenants from Adam and Noah and Moses and David, these are all parts of the covenant of redemption, coming more and more to realization until we get to the covenant of Christ, which I'm really looking forward to. I'm looking forward to going through all of these. And so we started with the covenant of commencement with Adam. Read about that in Genesis chapter 3, verses 14 through 19. And he talks about the word that's spoken to Satan, and the word that's spoken to the woman, and the word that's spoken to the man. And there's some things I didn't agree with when I read through here, but things that I've talked about a million times. Basically, it talks about how the serpent spoke to Eve, and then some people believe that Satan was using an actual snake to talk to her and stuff, and I've said that's not true. The serpent is Satan, and the serpent is basically just, symbolism, or it's just, it's a name for him, okay? He's called the serpent, and this O. Palmer Robertson believes, basically the popular belief, that it was a snake in the Garden of Eden. And, like here he says, initially the word of the curse addresses primarily the serpent as a tool of Satan. No, the serpent is Satan. Satan is the serpent. That is his nickname. And he spent a lot of time talking about this, which was like a waste to me. The crawling motion of the colorful snake needed an explanation in the ancient cultural context. The story of the curse of this beautiful beast was invented. And so he goes on and on about how it's the snake and stuff that gets the curse, whatever. He misinterprets that as far as I'm concerned, but it's not really not really a huge deal, but it was just pointless stuff that he was mentioning there. But the word that was spoken to Satan, which is the serpent, from God, is that there would be enmity between Satan and woman. And he says that he thinks that this woman represents womankind in general, not just Eve, but all women. Women fell first, or well, maybe not just all women, but womankind in general, I guess I'll just say. And this could be specifically because women fell because Eve, ate first from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but also because women bear children. Enmity between Satan's seed and woman's seed of woman is, or the seed of woman is not all descendants, because we see that Cain was from the evil one. We read in 1 John 3:12, that is spoken of Cain, that he was of the evil one, and so we can't say that the enmity between Satan's seed and woman's seed doesn't mean, all descendants from women, and so basically Cain was of Satan's seed. And then he said, by nature fallen woman brings forth depraved seed. And some of this was where I thought that like Calvinism could be interpreted, but doesn't necessarily have to be. And I'm not sure if I agreed with if he had like a Calvinistic spin on things, but I took these notes anyways. The nature of fallen woman brings forth depraved seed. And I do believe that, because I do believe in a sin nature. And some people attribute, the sin nature to Calvinism too. They say if you believe in a sin nature, then you're believing Calvinist doctrine, basically. I don't agree with that. But by the grace of God, enmity is established within the hearts of some of those, and some, these are the seed of the woman. And so basically the seed of the woman are the ones who are the followers of God. And, that's done of man's free will, and I don't know if this writer is like taking out free will in this, but I think the same thing can be, I can kind of go along with the same thing as long as, free will is involved. So woman's seed are the faithful, in the Lord. And Satan's seed are the ones, I don't think necessarily that Satan's seeds are just, just how people are born naturally depraved, or if it's more specifically, like the enemies of God, once they get to that point to where they're just totally rejecting Christ. But anyway, or, once a person rejects the gospel, I don't know. But there's this division between Satan's seed and woman's seed. And it talks about what Satan's seed is. And he mentions Cain. He mentions demons, how there's angels that followed Satan. In Luke 3:7, I think it was John the Baptist called some of the Pharisees the generation of vipers, which is kind of like saying the sons of Satan, basically. Jesus said in John 8:44 that, they were of their father, the devil. And so basically, the hypocrites, the antichrist, enemies of God, the enemies of Christ, are Satan's seed. And so later on in this passage, it goes from talking about, the woman's seed to he specifically, which is intended to be Jesus as an individual, as opposed to, it also speaks of Satan. It goes from Satan's seed to Satan himself, and so it goes from woman's seed to he, which would mean Jesus. And I thought it was interesting to note, he said also that sometimes the seed is used for multiple people, like in Romans 16:20. It talks about how, like Satan will be crushed under under believers, the seed. But he says specifically that Jesus is mentioned when it says he. And so he's basically saying, seed can be used as single or multiple. And when it talks about, he shall crush the head of the serpent, basically, the head crushing represents a fatal wound, a mortal wound, and an open attack. And the heel, that Satan would bruise his heel, represents partial wound and subversive. So it talks about the subversity of Satan. And these the crushing of the head and the bruising of the heel and stuff like that. This originally spoken in Genesis is alluded to a lot in Scripture, like in Joshua 10, 22, 20. Joshua chapter 10, verse 22 through 25, Psalm 110, verse 6, Psalm 91, 13, Colossians 2:14, chapter 2, verse 14 and 15. It's talked about, the crushing of the head of the serpent for like the victory of believers. That's alluded to. Deliverance of God's people comes through the destruction of God's enemies. That's what he says. Explains, and this concept explains the Old Testament warfare and the imprecatory prayers. Satan has no blessing when God spoke to him here. The seed of the woman does. Okay, so there's no blessing for Satan, only curse. Then we go on to the word that was spoken to the woman, and there's cursing and blessing involved. The fact that she will have children is a blessing, and it's not only a blessing in a domestic way in which, the children help the mother, and the children love the mother, and there's this relationship, bond between them and so forth, but also in the greater scheme of conflict with Satan's seed and the greater scheme of redemption. It's a blessing. And it's a curse in the sense of childbearing, the sorrows and pains involved with that. And there's a curse that woman will desire to dominate her husband and control him. And he said there's different interpretations for what is said about that she would desire to rule over him, basically, but the husband will rule over her. And he uses this example with Cain and sin in Genesis 4:7, where kind of the same language is used, that Cain would desire to, rule over sin, but it would rule over him, basically. And so it's this idea of controlling or dominating. So that's how he interprets it, that the wife will desire to, rule over the husband, just as Eve usurped Adam, when he told her, not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of the good and evil. She did anyway. And so there's this constant struggle between, the relationship, marriage between man and wife. And so that's part of the curse that was spoken to woman. And then we go on to the word that was spoken to man. It's the same thing as far as they're both being a curse and a blessing. The blessing spoken to man is that he would eat bread in Genesis 3:17. And so man, Adam, brought all creation under the curse of death and deserved to die. And yet God promises to sustain him life. So that's why this is significant that God said that, he will eat bread. He's sustaining him life even though he deserves death. God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. Matthew 5:45, and so we see this theme, that God is gracious. And the curse, though, is that by the sweat of his face you will eat bread, and so this signifies excessive labor on the man's part. And also the curse is death. In Genesis 3:19, Adam was created to rule the earth, but now the earth would rule over him, the earth's dust. God said, you're from dust you came, and from dust you shall return. And so he talked about how all these things still are some of our greatest trials today, that, struggling for food, and the labor, and childbearing and stuff like that, and death. These are all things that are still, our primary struggles in life as mankind, as humans. So this is the covenant of Adam, and it's like the beginning of the covenant of redemption. We see, a curse for Satan, and that would, come to realization with Christ, when he defeats Satan on the cross, basically, and he fulfills, the prophecy, and he fulfills the covenant to redeem mankind, and these blessings on the part of woman and man, having children and eating bread and everything, these all go towards accomplishing that goal, to bring Christ, to make a people for God, and basically that Christ would come into the world, from their genealogy and such, and then that God's goal would be finished, that this purpose would be finished. So that's interesting. Next would be going on to the covenant of Noah. So thank you guys. I'd like to hear what you like to say about this stuff, and God bless.